Hello and welcome to this broadcast organized by the Policy Center for the New South. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway bordered by Iran and key Gulf oil producers, is once again at the heart of global tensions. More than a quarter of the world's oil exports, around 20 million barrels each day, pass through this critical maritime corridor. Since Israeli strikes in early June 2025, Iran has responded with missile attacks, fueling fears that the conflict could spill into these vital shipping lanes. Any disruption or closure of the strait could send ripples across the global economy, cutting oil supplies and pushing prices sharply higher. But the stakes extend far beyond energy markets. The growing crisis is also complicating diplomatic efforts to revive negotiations over Iran's nuclear program. Today, the world is watching closely, aware that even a partial blockade of Hormuz could spark serious economic and geopolitical consequences. To help us understand these complex dynamics, I am joined by Dr. Amir Abdulreda. He is an assistant professor at Mohammed VI Polytechnic University in Rabat, Morocco. Dr. Abdulreda, thank you very much for accepting the invitation.
Thanks for having me. Very happy to be here today.
Thank you. To start, what strategic importance does the Strait of Hormuz hold in global energy, global supply chains?
So the Strait of Hormuz is one of these chokeholds, so to say, in international markets. It's very key in the sense that it stands at this, let's say, corridor between finance and politics, between finance and geopolitics, so to say. It's very important in the trade of oil, especially because it's this very narrow waterway that is in between Iran and Arab Gulf countries, and which is heavily influenced by the Iranian Navy because a lot of it is in Iranian territorial waters. If not most of it, from what my memory, if my memory serves me right. And as a result, makes it such that it can be used to influence geopolitics. What do I mean by this? On one hand, we have 20% roughly of global oil supplies, and mainly supplies towards East Asia, that pass through there. Saudi Arabia uses it, Iraq uses it, the UAE uses it, in order to bring their oil from their own territory to global energy markets. And as I've mentioned, especially to go to East Asia. And because it goes through Iranian territorial waters, and because the position of Iran in international politics is so sensitive for most of the, last few decades, it's been used as a threat, so to say. What kind of a threat? We're going to close the straits and therefore unsettle energy markets if you do this or that against us. I can give you a bit of a sense of the history of the straits. A very brief history is that it's been threatened many times in the past because obviously unsettling financial markets is going to be punitive towards the rest of the world, and it's a good thing to do if you want to put pressure on your enemies. During the Iran-Iraq War of the 80s, it's been something that's been threatened. The issue is that on both sides, doing so, closing the strait, brings a lot of, let's say, risks, even for Iran. Because if you do this, you're attacking in some way, shape, or form the rest of the world. You're engaging in some kind of economic or financial war with the rest of the world. As a result, in the 80s, when the straits were threatened, the U.S. had also threatened that if, Iran closes it, the U.S. is going to engage a bit more. In our case today, it's pretty much the same scenario. Iran is being attacked by Israel. Iran is attacking back Israel. There is involvement from the U.S. side that's been acknowledged by President Trump. And as a result, it's a bit of a tense and complicated balance. How far do you go in putting pressure against Israel and its allies, all the while trying to prevent others to get into the war more seriously against you, right? Iran is very isolated. For it to unravel the war into an entrance of the United States more formally is a very serious risk. Even if the United States has attacked the nuclear sites already, they're not so to say, very seriously engaged. Americans are very reticent to get into yet another Middle East war. Trump himself has campaigned multiple times in the past against these Middle East wars, and there's a lot of backlash from the U.S. political establishment and especially from the population against these Middle East wars. And so these limited attacks on the nuclear sites that President Trump has claimed have destroyed entirely or mostly nuclear capacities should be enough for him. He's very happy with this. He wants the war to end. And for what it's worth, it's somewhat ended for the past week or so. And the heat is largely gone. On the other side, the Iranian parliament have passed a motion to close the straits, but the ultimate decision rested with higher echelons, such as the supreme leader. And obviously, it's always, let's say, more convenient to threaten to close the strait than to actually close it. Because, for instance, if as I've said before, if you do so, you really bring in the US and other powers into the war, which would definitely play into the hands of the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, who is trying, admittedly so, to bring in the US a bit more strongly into the war, because, as they've admitted themselves, they cannot fully unsettle the Iranian regime and the Islamic Republic and the nuclear threat without such a stronger help from the United States. And so obviously, as I've said, it's a double-edged sword.
The closure of the Strait of Hormuz could have global consequences and economic consequences. How the escalating military tensions around Iran could impact the security and the stability of maritime traffic through the strait?
So it would impact it very strongly, right? If they close the strait, it means that no oil passes through, which means that 20% of oil flowing towards global markets are just stuck. Right. We've had situations like this, where supply doesn't meet demand, and we've seen what it's led to with the two oil shocks of the past century, which have been used in the context of wars also, and also wars in relation to Israel. And so it's very tricky. It's very tricky. It means that the Iranian Navy would take over the strait, would block it, would probably bring about a more stronger engagement with the tankers that flow through by arresting them, by accosting them, and so on, as it's done in a very limited fashion whenever it wanted to, bug some countries, U.S. oil tankers and whatnot. And so it's a very problematic issue, so to say.
If the closure is effectively done, today it's a threat. How do energy markets today are reacting to these threats?
It's a very good question. So energy markets have reacted in an extremely smart way. Why do I say that? Because oil traders have been very attentive to threats and reality. So oil traders try to invest or sell their oil futures, which is an engagement to buy oil in the future at a set price, in relation to what's going on, what's happening. And for the most part, before geopolitical analysts, before media completely digested the fact that the threat was not going to materialize, oil traders had already bet on oil prices in a way that ultimately reflected what ended up happening, which meant that by Monday in pre-markets, Monday very early in the morning in Eastern Standard Time in the United States, oil prices had already started to go down. So let me give a bit of a recap of what happened before so that it makes sense. As soon as 2 weeks ago, we had reports that the U.S. was pulling out embassy personnel and families of their embassy personnel and of some of the military personnel that are based in U.S. military bases in the region. Oil markets started to react. There's something going on. We need to look into cables. We need to talk to informants. We need to look at public news. That is like some of the faster, let's say, published public news to understand what's going on. And prices really started to jump. It really went up all over the end of the last 2 weeks until it started to settle last Monday, when even though the Iranian parliament had passed this motion to close the strait, it started to be clear that it would be completely irrational for the higher echelons of the Iranian leadership to close it more properly.
Especially in the closure of the strait is also impacting negatively the Iranian economy, right?
Exactly.
And this is something that we have to mention in the air here and we need to emphasize on, but also on some global partners like China, because most of the trade goes through the strait. So China would be very, very much impacted. Do you think that China would be implicated in the geopolitical scene and this conflict between Israel and Iran?
That's a point I have not mentioned, but that's definitely something that weighs heavily on Iranian leadership because one of the biggest purchasers of Iranian oil is China. And obviously, China has been involved, I shouldn't say obviously, but it's suspected very heavily that China has been involved in rearming, in selling military material to Iran during the confrontations. And China remains one of the members of the UN Security Council, along with Russia, that is much more inclined towards Iran. And so Iran does not want to antagonize them, right? So that is something that maybe we can talk about when we talk about the impact of the closure on prices for our own countries. But the reality is that the countries that are the most dependent on oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz are Eastern Asian countries. And these countries are not, at the very most, neutral, negative, at the very most, and for the most part, neutral, positive towards Iran. And so Iran doesn't gain from doing that. Its own oil flows through there. It doesn't make any sense.
Absolutely. What are the potential economic consequences for African countries? We have talked about China, but Asian countries, about 4 African countries, particularly Morocco, if the Strait of Hormuz were to be partially or fully closed, especially regarding oil prices and supply security?
That's an important question, and I suspect one that our viewers are going to be the most interested in, because what does it mean at the end of the day for the day-to-day of Moroccans and of people on the continent? There are 2 levels of the answer to that question has 2 levels. On the first level, which is where do our countries buy oil from, it's a bit mitigated. Okay, African countries have, and all countries around the world, buy oil from a variety of suppliers, a variety of other countries, even if they themselves produce oil. And that's in order to maintain, a steady supply at a reasonable price. Morocco, for its own part, does purchase oil from some Gulf countries, and so it could be affected, but not as much as countries of East Asia that are very reliant on that oil. We do in Morocco buy from other parts. I don't have the names of the countries directly in my mind, but if I remember correctly, some European countries and a lot of the United States, if my memory serves me right, but don't quote me on this. Now, for a lot of these sub-Saharan countries of Africa, they don't necessarily buy at all much oil from that part of the world, from the Gulf, the Persian Gulf, the Arab Gulf, whatever you want to call this. They buy it from Nigeria. They buy it from Belgium, surprisingly enough, from European countries. They buy it from the United States, you see?
But even though with the diversification, maybe...
That's the first level of answer to that question. The second level is everybody's going to be impacted anyways, right? You're going to have oil, but the price is going to jump.
Absolutely.
The price is going to jump because energy markets are linked.
That's what I was going to emphasize, that even if you are not buying directly from that specific region of the world, there would be some global stress over oil products. So no matter from where you will be buying oil, we will be buying it at a very high price, and it could also impact the whole economy of your country, whether you are an oil producer or not an oil producer country.
Exactly. And so right now, if I remember correctly, prices had stabilized around $70 a barrel, but the risk was that it was going to reach all the way to $100 a barrel. And that could be a repeat of, some of the situations we have seen during COVID-19, where oil prices really skyrocketed because supplies were affected.
Absolutely.
You see? Think about the price of grain, the price of some of the most basic commodities that were affected during COVID-19 because of the Russia-Ukraine war, and because so much of the most basic commodities were flowing from and still flow from, Ukrainian ports, you see? And so at the end of the day, it's an issue for everyone. If the Strait of Hormuz is closed, because energy prices, oil prices will skyrocket. We've been saying oil prices, but there's also natural gas, right? Liquefied gas that flows through there. So it's a problem.
Absolutely. Given your expertise, we are talking about a subject that is an intersection of politics and global economy. Do you think that the strait will be fully or partially closed?
I don't personally think so. I think it's closing the strait is a very last resort strategy. What you would call in American slang a Hail Mary.
Okay.
You see, there's nothing else to be done. Iran is really being attacked from all parts, and it doesn't see a way to maybe try to stop this attack or hurt its enemies. It goes for the Strait of Hormuz.
Okay.
But unless there is such a vital threat, which we've never reached substantially during the war, I don't think it will do it.
Okay, so doing so would be completely irrational.
It's irrational because at the end of the day, if you put yourself in the shoes of the Iranian leaders, you don't want the U.S. to get in. The Europeans don't want the war. They've been trying to de-escalate as much as possible. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, for a whole set of reasons that we probably will talk about in a different podcast, does want this war to go on. He does want this war to unsettle the Iranian leadership more seriously. Would benefit and would be the main benefactor, so to say, in the United States entering the war and therefore in the Strait of Hormuz being closed. Because as soon as it's closed, you're just opening the gates of hell.
Absolutely.
And yourself.
Well, Dr. Emile, thank you very much for your valuable insights. Dear audience, thank you for following this broadcast brought to you by the Policy Center for the New South. Stay tuned for more episodes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.